What's up everybody, welcome to the Gooner channel, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at all of the players who are likely to leave Arsenal this summer, what that's going to mean for squad depth and where we might need to go out and get replacements, and some suggestions of who that might be. So if you like this kind of content, then go ahead and like it, and if you haven't yet, then join us on the journey as we build a thoughtful community of intelligent Arsenal fans by hitting the subscribe and possibly even the bell notification so you never miss out. Let's get started. Now, this is the post-season. We've all faced up to our disappointments. I think a lot of other fans wanted us to be crying and frustrated and angry. But actually, I think generally speaking, intelligent Arsenal fans are just proud of the fact that we've broken our record for most games won in a season. We had the best defence in the Premier League and we scored the most goals we've ever scored. So you have to see progress there. Particularly when you think that last season, many people thought that if we didn't win the league, we would never compete again. And we've proven that to be wrong. And now I think most people can see that we are strong challengers and likely to be strong challengers next season. But, as I said at the top of the video, there are going to be a lot of players leaving. We already know some. And I'm going to go through it position by position, starting in the most obvious place to start. And that is, of course, goalkeeper. At the end of the summer transfer window, we swooped in to sign David Raya. You would imagine, and most people would have praised this as great business. After all, a £3 million loan with an option to buy for around 27 million, when Tottenham had already had 35 million rejected, felt like really good business to me. But all the talk was around the fact that you can't have two first-choice goalkeepers. So, would the signing of David Raya, was he notably better than Ramsdale? Ramsdale, after all, had arrived at Arsenal with little fanfare and few people very pleased about it. He'd been relegated in his previous 2 seasons, so many people thought it was a complete waste of money. But after he replaced Bernd Leno and made his way into the first team as a first-team regular, and some of his performances last season were outstanding. I'm thinking particularly of that save against Salah in the game against Liverpool, where we would otherwise have lost. Not that it made a difference in the end, but it was still a great moment. He wasn't just his goalkeeping that made us warm to him, though. It was his charisma, the way he baited other fans, and he brought a sense of fun and something else to the goalkeeping position, which we haven't seen. So it was a shock that we had gone all out to sign David Raya, and it also illustrated something else. This came out recently that Steve Round, who had been one of the chief coaches at Arsenal, working alongside Stuvenberg and Arteta, he left in July, and the reason recently that he gave was that he was absolutely adamant that we shouldn't go out and sign David Raya, that the money should be spent in other positions. And as a result of that falling out, Arteta dug in, wouldn't shift, and Round felt he had to leave. Now, bear in mind that Round first worked with Arteta when he was one of the coaching staff under David Moyes at Everton. So there's a long relationship between them. And what this shows us is that Arteta was absolutely determined. It also kind of tells us, since Steve Round left in July, that this wasn't just some last-minute decision. It had been worked on. And we know that Ikani Kana, the goalkeeping coach, had recommended Raya, that we tried to sign Raya before. Raya was an exceptional goalkeeper for Brentford, but many people felt he was too similar, not quite better than Ramsdale, and so why would you need to make this potentially divisive decision? Something that could unsettle the back four. I think that argument's been won now, hasn't it? David Raya, in only 32 appearances, managing to win the Golden Gloves, ahead of a really strong field of goalkeepers this season. He hasn't had a lot to do this season, to be fair, but when called upon, he has been there. Some wobbles, some mistakes, but not as many as we saw from Ramsdale. And I think, by and large, most of us are now convinced that David Raya is in. So we know that David Raya, we know that the option to buy hasn't fully been triggered yet, but David Raya surely is going to be our number 1 goalkeeper next season. And then that leaves the question of what happens to Aaron Ramsdale. Obviously, Aaron Ramsdale is too good a goalkeeper to sit on the bench all season. And even though Arteta, in his press conference announcing the signing of David Raya, or the loan of David Raya, said that he'd had this idea for a while, that the goalkeeping position should be like all the other positions on the pitch. It should be interchangeable. Sometimes in the past, he'd wanted to bring on a new goalkeeper. And so we were kind of led to believe that might be a new approach, that he might take the De Zerbi approach, which is, after all, what Roberto De Zerbi did at Brighton. He had 2 goalkeepers and almost played each the same number of games. Of course, other teams such as Liverpool and to a lesser degree Man City, but also Newcastle were forced into goalkeeping changes. And that was the other thing that Arteta said. He said, if you lose your first choice goalkeeper, do you really want Matt Turner in between the sticks? Matt Turner didn't have a great season at Nottingham Forest. So all round, I think we can say that Arteta was probably right on this one. Should Aaron Ramsdale therefore be sold? Now, I've heard people speculating that we won't get a lot of money for him because, you know, everybody knows that we want him to go. But it is worth remembering that Aaron Ramsdale signed a contract extension just before we signed David Raya. Ramsdale's dad was talking about it, how it wasn't right to do that if you knew you were bringing someone else in. Well, he signed the contract, and unless he has a break clause in there, we could dig our heels and say we want him to stay at number 2. He hasn't made a big fuss about wanting to leave. And most of the speculation about him going either to Newcastle or another team has come from people just hypothesising that's what he should do. And maybe that is what he should do. Maybe he is too good a keeper and he does have aspirations of playing for England in the number 1 shirt. Maybe he does need to leave. But if I was Arteta, I would very strongly be suggesting to Aaron Ramsdale that if you're as good as you think you are, and you can learn to distribute the ball in a way that I see an Arsenal goalkeeper doing, then maybe you should stay. Now, all of this is contextual. I did read with great interest last week that Wojciech Szczesny, whose contract is coming up at Juventus and would still be considered a homegrown player because, after all, he came through our academy, Wojciech Szczesny could be a free transfer signing. If we brought him in and still had that homegrown player, he's a multiple Serie A winning goalkeeper. He won 2 FA Cups and the Golden Gloves with Arsenal. So it would be a fantastic signing if we could bring him in for free as a backup goalkeeper. Then maybe we could allow Aaron Ramsdale to leave. And in that circumstance, then, much as it pains me to say it because I do love Aaron Ramsdale, you'd have to let him go. So I guess, like a lot of these coming up, Aaron Ramsdale's future is up in the air. But if you get an offer around 30 or 40 million and you can break even on the money that you spent on him, maybe it is time for him to go. Because what you don't want is a player unsettled in the squad when all you're trying to build is a family harmony. So Aaron Ramsdale for me stays, but with the caveat that if you can bring in Wojciech Szczesny, he should go. As for Carl Hayne, listen, I've never seen him play, so I have no strong opinion. And a third choice goalkeeper is pretty much that. We do have Arthur Okonkwo on loan, had a great spell at Wrexham after Sturm Graz and got promoted with Wrexham. So I don't really know what's going to happen there, but maybe he comes in and replaces Carl Hayne as our third choice keeper, or maybe he goes out on loan again or we sell him. I don't know. And look, I can't really say, but Carl Hayne certainly did nothing wrong. Didn't play and did nothing wrong. So our 3 goalkeepers next season, I would say, should be David Raya, Aaron Ramsdale and Carl Hayne. In defence, we've got a really easy one because Cedric Soares has already announced he's leaving. Look, he had a pretty dire loan spell to Fulham the season before where he barely played. And this season he came on in just 3 games for I think a sum total of 60 minutes. And that was West Ham away, Burnley away and Sheffield United away. And by the time he came on the pitch, we were already 4-5 and 6-0 up. So it wasn't like there was a lot of stress on his season, but he is leaving. And look, I think we can say that at the time we signed him, he was very much touted as a player who could play left and right back equally well. I think he kind of did, to be honest, not quite well enough. And I have no malice towards Cedric Soares, but if I'm honest, I'm not going to miss him. And I will say this, that, you know, for players like this who essentially didn't work out at Arsenal, he still scored a goal and he still played just around 36 times for Arsenal, which is a dream I would have had and never fulfilled. So he's always going to have that. I think part of the reason they kept him around is that he is loved by the squad. And when he announced he was leaving, David Raya actually came out on Instagram and wished him well, calling him brother. So maybe this is part of the family building exercise that Mikel Arteta is doing such a good job of. But Cedric Soares is gone. So we know that he's leaving on a free transfer at the end of a contract. When you look at the next easiest person to say what's happening to, it's got to be Jurrien Timber, hasn't it? Signed with great optimism at the in the summer transfer window last year, one of 4 players we brought in, and then injured on the first game of the season and didn't reappear till the last game of the season. In that cameo performance, which showed quite a bit of what we could hope for. And in a poll I did halfway through the season, many people have him as our first choice left back, and this given that in the entire season he played less than 90 minutes. I don't know how you guys know, but certainly his goal against Blackburn in the under-21s does give an indication that you might be right. And I am hopeful that we're going to see the best of Jurrien Timber in an injury-free season next season. So he's definitely staying. We know that. The next easy one there is Ben White, who signed a contract extension and will enjoy a summer vacation, not playing in the Euros for Gareth Southgate. There were lots of people very angry with him for turning down a chance to represent his country. I don't know him well enough to understand what went on there, and I'm guessing you don't either. But in any case, I am glad that he's going to get a bit of a rest, because he is an ever-present for us and one of the most dependable players. And one of the players in our team that has a bit of gamesmanship around him and a bit of shithousery. So we need that, and I love him. Ben White is staying, no question about that. Ditto Gabriel and Saliba, who I think are without question the best centre-back pairing. Look, I think it speaks for itself, doesn't it? If you concede the fewest goals as a centre-back pairing, then you are the best centre-back pairing. I think Gabriel and Saliba complement each other so well. What a partnership they are, reminiscent of Bold and Adams. And I would hate to see either of them leave, and there's no talk about it whatsoever. It's worth remembering, of course, Gabriel in the summer transfer window last year was linked suddenly with a move to Saudi and didn't play in the first 3 games amidst that kind of speculation that he might be leaving. Glad he didn't. He's been just as good as ever this season, and I expect him to continue that. He's got a little way to go to reach his ceiling, I think. So Ben White, Saliba and Gabriel are definitely staying. Tomiyasu's recently signed a contract extension as well, so we know he's staying. And although he has had his trouble with injuries, he's so versatile. He can play at left back, he can play at right back, he's a centre back. I don't know, perhaps you could even play him in goal. But certainly he doesn't let you down, and he's physical and strong. And when Arteta seemed to cool a little bit on Zinchenko after Kivior had a few mistakes, notably being absolutely ruined by Leroy Sané, which is no great shame, but not quite the player you want at left back. I know Timber's back now, but Kivior probably down the pecking order behind Tomiyasu at left back spot, but such a versatile and important player. You can see why we signed an extension. Zinchenko. Now this one is up in the air for me, because he recently came out and said, look, I'm sorry I haven't had the season I should have done, but I love it here and I'm looking forward to next season. I can improve and we kick on again. And he does say all the right things. I'd like it if he was a little less present on social media and didn't call any huddles in the middle of the pitch. But I've always been a big fan, and I think that it comes down to the eye test. He fails the eye test for a lot of people, and it seems to be responsible for giving away a lot of goals. I think when you try and pin people down, it's hard to say exactly where, but there were a couple of instances last season where we seemed to be being targeted down the left-hand side. And certainly the goal against Aston Villa was exactly that kind of problem. So maybe he's not number 1 on the team sheet anymore, but certainly as a backup, I think we should keep Zinchenko. Let me know if you think I'm mad on that one. I know he's divisive, but I think Zinchenko is unlikely to be sold. And the social media and the Instagram post where he talks about how he's going to improve suggests that to me as well. So that's our defenders. If Suarez go, we're a defender light. I do think this all points to the fact that we need to bring somebody in. Rule Walters yet to sign a contract extension. At the start of the season, there was a lot of talk of him getting game time. Just never materialised. And now here we are in a situation where we are 1 defender light and have only 7 defenders to count on. And I don't think that's enough. As I said before, at the end of the video, we'll get to who I think the perfect signing would be to come in. But for now, I think we can all agree that we do need 1 more. And that Suarez is the only one who's really likely to be leaving. Midfield, though, is a different story. In midfield, we already know, just as Suarez is going, that El Neni, the last of the Arsene Wenger signings, a player who is much loved by everyone, we offered a contract extension to, despite the fact that he had a season-long injury. And I just want to say, I really love that we did that, because it was quite obvious he wasn't going to be able to play. But we gave him a contract extension because, presumably, of his impact around the team. He did his coaching badges. And I think that speaks really highly of us. In a business like football, which can be ruthless, showing that kind of love and compassion for a player, for a servant who's always given his best for Arsenal, always played with a smile on his face. I think it sends a really strong and healthy message to the other players in the squad that this isn't just a business. This is a family and we are building something for the future. So I was thrilled they did that. But look, he's had the season, very few minutes, never called on, and he comes up and has said touching farewell to the Arsenal fans. And I wish you well, Mo. I think you've been a brilliant player for us. Never quite got the flowers you deserved for some of the performances you put in. Weren't quite trendy and fashionable, but certainly I was really glad that you were an Arsenal player, and I wish you nothing but success in the future. Hopefully you come back as a coach and have a huge impact again. So he's definitely leaving. Players we know are definitely staying. Obviously Declan Rice, cheap at twice the price. Most expensive bargain of all time. Rolls-Royce of an engine, almost ever present in the season. Of course, he's staying, and I'm thrilled he is. I'm so glad we signed him. He was everything we hoped he'd be, and then some. And Captain Martin Odegaard, who seems to be progressing towards his potential, which is, I think, up there with Kevin De Bruyne. Look, I don't want to put any undue pressure on him, but for me, he looks like a player who's found his home. There was a good story recently where when Arsene Wenger and him were talking, Arsene Wenger had reminded him he could have been an Arsenal player for a lot longer, and he made a mistake going to Real Madrid, and Martin Odegaard apparently agreed. I think Martin Odegaard is in exactly the right team for him. Now, I don't think he's a finished article. I think at times this season we've seen outstanding performances, but if there are criticisms, maybe he holds on to the ball a bit much, and maybe he does go missing in the big games or isn't able to have the impact of a Kevin De Bruyne. But he has got years to go. He is still really young, and he is our captain, and he has distinguished himself very well, and I'm thrilled he's in the team. Now, for the rest of the midfield, if you count Kai Havertz midfield, which is where he's listed in the Arsenal, but I think the experiment with him in the 8 didn't really work. It's only when he moved up to that number 9 position that we saw the best of him, that Raumdeuter in him. For those of you who play Football Manager will know what that is. But those 3 are absolutely integral, clearly, to the team. But further down the list, Jorginho has signed a contract extension, although saying that, I don't really think it means that we're going to see a lot of minutes from him. I will say that when he came in for that game against Liverpool and allowed Declan Rice to get forward, we really started to move on and kick on there. Replacing Kai Havertz with Jorginho so that Declan Rice can occupy that space was part of the reason that we went on this phenomenal 18-game run in the calendar year of 2024, where we lost only 1 and drew only 1. Although, sadly, with the juggernaut that is Man City, that's have to be a problem. We know that he signed a contract extension, though. He will still be here. But the big questions are around, let's say, Thomas Partey, who in the last few days has been linked with Turkish clubs and clubs all over the world. And I think, even though he was solid in the team in the last 6 games that he played in, and Arteta came out and said he was important to the squad, I do think the age he is, with the wages he's on, it must make more sense to move him on. I think that having him in the team when he could be injury prone, has been injury prone for us, would be a risk that's unnecessary. So I am guessing that we have seen the end of Thomas Partey, although, like I said, Arteta said he was hoping he'd stay. Perhaps that is true. A lot of the recent news, though, is linking him. But this is a transfer window season, so there will be links to everyone everywhere. My gut feeling now, and if it was me, and this is all I can say, this is what I would do, I would allow Thomas Partey to leave and bring in a replacement. Then there's Fabio Vieira, who, look, in his first season, he looked a bit lightweight, didn't quite adapt, had a few good games, but wasn't really the player that we were all hoping he would be. But I remember saying at the time, look, some players just take a year to settle in. He's not adjusted to the physicality of the Premier League. It's different in Portugal. And it reminded me a little bit of Robert Pires, because when he came in, of course, he had the same problem. That said, his second season wasn't a Robert Pires style second season. He had a great cameo against Fulham, where he came on and changed the game. Sadly, we weren't able to hold on to a win, because if we had, we would have won the Premier League. But that early promise disappeared, and after getting sent off and injured, he really hasn't been counted on ever since. So it's clear when Arteta doesn't really trust a player, he never plays him, and Vieira has no minutes at the end of the season. And so I think that we may not get the money back that we want from him, so a loan move for me feels most likely. But let me know. Am I missing something? Do you think Vieira is a quality player? The next one on the list, though, is, for me, a really difficult one. It's Emile Smith-Rowe. In just the same way Vieira hasn't really been trusted, Emile Smith-Rowe hasn't had the minutes you would have expected him to have. He had a great pre-season away with the England under-21s. In a Toulon tournament where he was one of the standout players, came back bulked up, ready to go, just didn't get started. And it's clear that Arteta doesn't quite know where to play him. Of course, when he broke through, his key positions were in that sort of number 10 role and also wide out on the left. And now that we have Martinelli and Trossard and Jesus, it doesn't look like he's going to get many games up in that left-hand side. It was discussed that he'd been retraining in that left 8 position, but when Havertz came in and took that position for most of the first part of the season, Smith-Rowe never got a look in. Now, the only thing that gives me hope, because I dearly hope he stays, he's Arsenal through and through, and that's part of the problem. He's also a homegrown player who we could make a lot of money off and offset that for profit and sustainability regulations, whatever form they take next season, and so would represent good business to sell him given the small outlay, massive return. But he's an Arsenal player through and through, and I think if there's one player that Arteta owes more than any other, it's Emile Smith-Rowe, because for that Boxing Day game that changed everything, that began this process, that began people believing in the project, it's been a long process to this point, and there has been progress throughout that, but it was the performances of Emile Smith-Rowe more than any other that gave us back our flair and our joy in the game. And so I would love to see him given a chance. The optimist in me hopes that Arteta's just holding him back in the way he did with Saliba. You'd be mad not to consider it likely that he would go. The question is, how much would we get for him and where would he go? It's just going to break my heart to see him, because I think he'd do really well if he went to a team like West Ham or Palace or Newcastle. For whichever reason, I think that is probably the likeliest outcome. Although I am hopeful I'm wrong, and let me know if you're also somebody who would like to see Emile Smith-Rowe stay. I know when this conversation comes up, and it has been an ever-present conversation for almost 2 seasons now, people always say, look, it's best for the player he moves on. And maybe that's true, but he is still young. There is still time. He could still have a very long and happy career ahead of him, and I'm still very hopeful it's at Arsenal. That's our midfield. Up front, the forwards. Well, Bukayo Saka, the star boy, he's not going anywhere. We know that. I did think that Martinelli's performance against Everton was really exciting, because as much as I love Saka, and I think there are other positions he could play, by the way. I'm not talking about left back or left wing back. But I do think, and there's been speculation that he could play inside. I think Merson was talking about it. So Saka isn't the kind of player who has to play out wide on the right, but we've just had no one else that can play there half as well as him. Martinelli, I thought that he looked really bright because he plays a different way. Obviously, when he's playing on the left as a right-footed player, he doesn't quite cut in like Saka does, but he was putting in crosses largely to no one. The end product might not have been there, but I thought he looked exciting against Everton and one of the players that could make a difference. And let's not forget that he has also played up front for Brazil, and that's possibly somewhere you could have him. Martinelli and Saka are too important to lose, and there's no chance they're leaving, so they're definitely staying. How great it is to be talking about Trossard in the way that we are with him, probably our most clinical finisher, and what a bargain. Is this the only time anyone's managed to get a deal off of Brighton? Usually they take your trousers off every single time. I mean, we overpaid for Ben White, although with the benefit of hindsight, that was a deal as well. But Trossard, a fan's favourite, iconic celebrations for goals, but most importantly, goals. He does get you goals. He finishes clinically. It was him that levelled it against Bayern. I really love Trossard. I know we all do. I'm not quite sure where his best position is yet, though. But whatever happens, he's definitely staying. Gabby Jesus. This is a big question. Of course, last season it was injuries that kept him from playing enough games. This season has been not great goal return. Although, I do want to say, for all of you that were clamouring for Ivan Toney, it is worth remembering that Ivan Toney, since returning from his lengthy ban for gambling, often against his own team, which is one of the reasons I don't like the idea of him coming to Arsenal, Ivan Toney has scored once every 362 minutes since returning, and Gabby Jesus once every 375 minutes. So very similar. Both underperforming massively, I think you could say. But if we'd spent 100 million on Ivan Toney, I think that would have been a disaster at this point. So the fact that we have Gabby Jesus, he is the only player like him. Against Sevilla, his pass and turn, his Cruyff turn and pass through to Martinelli and putting Martinelli on, he's just a little bit magic. And I think every team needs a player like him. Somebody who's a little bit Captain Chaos, but has so much technical ability. And I'm sure frightens the hell out of most defences. Versatile across the front three. Maybe he's not ever going to be the number 9 he really wanted to be. And maybe he is. He is still very young. But Gabby Jesus, there's a lot of talk about how he might go if we get enough money in for him. And again, as with Ramsdale, there is a caveat here. I don't want to see him go. But I will say, what if you could get Alexander Isak and do a kind of swap deal? Alexander Isak he's just proven himself to be an all-round number 9 package. 25 goals this season. You know, it hasn't started every game. A phenomenal player, and it's likely that we could, if Newcastle accepted an offer, which I know they're not keen to do, but they don't have European football to offer him, and we could double his wages with an offer. So I would love to see Alexander Isak come in, and if he does, it's hard to see how you play Havertz, Isak, and Jesus. Maybe one does have to go. But if we aren't out there getting Isak, I don't want us to necessarily get. There aren't a lot of strikers I'm that fussed about us getting. And also, I think since the turn of the year, it's been nice that people haven't constantly banged on about how we need a number 9. Although the game against Everton showed that we probably do need someone who can put the ball in the back of the net a little bit more often than our front three are doing at the moment. Vlahovic has gone quiet. I think there aren't just the big players out there. Victor Osimhen, again, I don't know if we're going to spend that kind of money. Guy Corres is often talked about, but in essence, but the one for me would be Alexander Isak if we can get him. But if we can't, I don't necessarily feel like we have to go and get someone. Then we get to the last two on my list, and the first of those is Reiss Nelson. And frankly, it's obvious now, he wasn't even in the matchday squad against Everton. He hasn't had any minutes. He hasn't really impressed when he's had them. It's almost a shame that he signed a contract extension. It hasn't done him any good, and it feels almost like it proved that goal against Bournemouth was a one-off rather than the start of something brilliant. He will always be remembered by Arsenal fans for that goal, even though it didn't ultimately lead to us winning the league. It did highlight a resurgence and a change in the atmosphere at the Emirates. The excitement had come back to Arsenal, and God, what would you give to have scored a goal like that? So wherever Reiss Nelson goes, I think he'll be a very good player. He had a great loan spell in Germany, and I wish him nothing but the best. But surely the time has come on Reiss Nelson. And finally, as much as I like him and he seems the right kind of personality, I think the curse of the 14 shirt on Eddie Nketiah and the fact that he really just has never taken his chances when they've come to him has meant that towards the end of the season, he had 3 minutes against Bayern Munich, minutes here or there, that never really going to do anything, not shown it off the bench. He had that one game against Sheffield United with a marvellous hat-trick, which had me doubting myself, because up to that point I was convinced he should have gone. Eddie Nketiah, I think, is off. So where does that leave us? Well, if we do lose 6 or 7 players, we have to replace them. Now, taking a look at the obvious... Now, I will be doing videos all summer about players likely to come in, but I just want to start off with who I would bring in, because I don't know enough about Zubimendi, and he looks like one that may well come in to fill that number 6 spot. If we do lose Thomas Partey, having lost Granit Xhaka last season, we do need to be bringing someone in as a defensive midfielder. That is the one weakest area for me. And I would love that position to be filled by Joshua Kimmich. I think he is an outstanding, whatever Thomas Tuchel thinks, and I very rarely agree with Thomas Tuchel, but Joshua Kimmich is an outstanding defensive midfielder. Somebody who would be able to fit in anywhere across the back four if needed and therefore strengthen our defensive positions, but who is a proven winner. Somebody who has a winning mentality and a fantastic defensive midfielder. So my signings this summer would be Wojciech Szczesny to replace Aaron Ramsdale, and I don't really think anyone else. We have been linked with other goalkeepers, but if we could get Szczesny, that would be brilliant. I love a homecoming story. Joshua Kimmich to add further cover in the defence, because he can play at centre-back, right-back and left-back, although less at left-back. And Alexander Isak. I'd like there to be another defensive midfielder, just because I still think we'll be light now that El Neni is leaving as well. Although, look, I know El Neni didn't play, but I think we were a bit short in defensive midfield. So the other one for me, that's up for debate. I want to ask you, would you have Bruno Guimaraes? Because he seems that everybody's favourite to come in, and he is a proper shithouse. Should I just forgive him for his forearm smash against Jorginho? It should have been a red card, the most obvious red card of the season. Should I overlook that and bring in a player who's obviously determined to win, great on the ball, one of the best defensive midfielders in the Premier League? Onana at Everton, Douglas Luiz, it's gone quiet on him. I think of those, I would opt for Douglas Luiz, but Villa fell apart a little bit. Maybe he's not as dependable. And as I said earlier, I don't know enough about Zubimendi. Maybe he is the answer. God knows he's been talked about often enough. So they're the signings I would bring in. Wojciech Szczesny as second goalkeeper. Joshua Kimmich as right back, defensive midfielder, centre back if needed, left back. Douglas Luiz from Villa, because I just don't like Bruno Guimaraes. Although I'm kind of flip-flopping on this one. Help me out here. Douglas Luiz or Bruno Guimaraes if you had to pick one of those two, assuming it isn't Martin Zubimendi who comes in. And Alexander Isak. If we could make him the outstanding signing of the summer, that would be fantastic. There is a lot of speculation around left-backs coming in, but when you actually look at it, we do have enough players who can play at left-back. I mean, Yuri Timber, Zinchenko, Tomiyasu, Kivior. Do we really need to be going out and getting anyone else in left-back? Again, let me know in the comments. That's been my roundup of players likely to leave. As I said earlier, we have all summer to discuss players who might be coming in and even those who might be going out. Transfer window madness, lots of people within the knows, lots of silly articles. Clip me now. Are we going to get linked with Benzema again? Hope not. Surely not. Now that he's in Saudi, surely not. But some of the old names will, I'm sure, pop up again. Until I see you again, let me know how you feel about our squad, where you'd like to see. I'm really interested to hear from you, players that you would bring in. Until I see you again, be lucky. Lots of love.